So in June 2026, the United States government spent more money just paying the interest on its national credit card than it spent on the entire United States military.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's just a staggering threshold to cross.
Right.
Because, when a global superpower can barely afford the interest on its own debt, well, basically every other system around it starts to fracture.
Exactly. And, that is the reality we are unpacking in today's deep dive.
Right.
We are opening up this highly classified style intelligence document. It's titled The Strategic Telemetry and Macrostructural Assessment of the United States from June 2026.
Which is a very dense read.
Oh, incredibly dense.
Yeah.
But the mission of this report is to evaluate the U.S. sovereign apparatus across 6 core indices. And it scores them on a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 means perfect baseline stability and 10 means absolute systemic failure.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that this document excises all the subjective feelings,
And no punditry.
Exactly. No cable news shouting. It relies solely on the raw physical, financial, and legal ledger data. It honestly reads like a mathematical autopsy of a system under just unprecedented stress.
It really does. But hey, before we jump into the numbers, we really need to set some explicit ground rules for you listening.
Yeah, this is crucial.
You need to know that this source material contains heavily politically charged content. I mean, it details major actions, policies, societal responses involving both left-wing and right-wing groups, as well as the executive branch.
Right.
So we need to be clear. We are taking absolutely zero political sides here. We are not endorsing any of the viewpoints, policies, or actions described in this document.
None of them.
Right. Our only job today is to act as impartial guides to help you understand the geopolitical and mathematical concepts contained in the original source material.
Exactly. We're simply reading the raw telemetry and, explaining the mechanisms at play.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the very first major finding in this report is, frankly, a bombshell.
Yeah, it really sets the tone.
According to the data, the mathematical probability of a U.S. soft landing in late June 2026 is officially, well, statistically negligible.
Meaning it's not happening.
Right. This system is in a cascading failure. And the trigger for this starts with the Stage 3 Vulnerability Index, which is sitting at a critical 8.9 out of 10.
Right, 8.9 is...
It's massive. And the catalyst for all of this traces back to February 2026, Operation Epic Fury.
Right, which was a massive kinetic shock to the system.
Yeah.
We are talking about a unilateral U.S. and Israeli strike on Iran, authorized directly from Air Force One.
Unilateral.
Exactly. And to understand the economic fallout, we have to grasp the sheer scale of the military action here. Just in the first 12 hours alone, there were nearly 900 sorties involving B-1s, B-2 stealth bombers, F-35s. Yeah. And by April, they had struck over 13,000 targets. So the initial strikes did achieve their tactical objective, right? They dismantled air defense systems, and they successfully assassinated Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei.
Right, along with some of the top Revolutionary Guard naval commanders, right?
Right, exactly.
But the broader geopolitical goal there was to engineer a regime collapse, and that completely failed.
Yeah, spectacularly. The regime didn't collapse at all, it entrenched. They just replaced him with his son, Mojtaba Khamenei.
Right.
And the hardliners in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, they initiated this immediate catastrophic blowback.
Which brings us to the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, the absolute closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
Which, people often call the jugular vein of the global economy.
For good reason.
Yeah, but let's break down why a precision military strike there instantly paralyzes global commerce. Because it's a geographic bottleneck, right?
Exactly.
At its narrowest, the strait is only like 21 miles wide.
Yeah.
And the actual shipping lanes inside that are even narrower. So you cannot just bypass it with trucks or, build a new pipeline overnight.
You really can't. And when the IRGC slashed that jugular, the logistical devastation was just instant.
Right.
So on March 1st, they struck an oil tanker called the Skylight.
Yeah.
By March 2nd, the strait was completely shut down to any ships serving the U.S. or allied nations. And, prior to this closure, that specific waterway facilitated 25% of the global seaborne oil trade.
25%?
Yeah, and
Right.
20% of the world's liquefied natural gas.
Wow. And even factoring in the overland pipelines that bypass the strait through Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the telemetry report outlines a massive shortfall. We are looking at a net global deficit of 14.5 to 16.5 million barrels of oil per day.
Which is, I mean, that's irreplaceable volume. Nations without pipeline bypasses, like Iraq and Kuwait, they saw their export capacity drop to literally zero overnight.
Zero.
Yeah.
No.
And for the ships that tried to operate anywhere near the region, the financial penalties just became insurmountable.
Because of the insurance.
Exactly. War risk insurance premiums for vessels just trying to enter the Gulf of Oman spiked from 0.125% to 1.5%.
Which, I mean, that sounds like a tiny fraction, 1.5%.
Right, until you apply it to the sheer value of a massive crude carrier and all its cargo.
Exactly. That jump translates to an extra $250,000 in operational costs for a single ship, just for the insurance.
Yeah, and major carriers just couldn't absorb that risk or that cost, so they suspended transits entirely. They started rerouting their fleets all the way around to Cape of Good Hope at the bottom of Africa.
Which is a massive detour.
It adds 14 to 21 days to the journey. So, you are burning exponentially more fuel, tying up ships for longer periods, and triggering these massive cascading freight surcharges.
And I mean, if you're driving to work right now paying $5.37 for a gallon of diesel, you don't need a government report to tell you the system is buckling.
Exactly.
The report notes retail gas surged to a national average of $3.98. And because the Persian Gulf region produces 30% of the world's seaborne ammonia and urea, U.S. agricultural fertilizer spiked by 28% in just 3 weeks.
Yeah, which guarantees food inflation down the line. It is a textbook, massive supply shock.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
If oil, gas, and fertilizer are spiking so dramatically, the domestic economy should theoretically be suffering. Yet, the official state headlines claim a healthy 2.1% GDP growth for the first quarter of 2026. Right. How do we have 2.1% economic growth while diesel is nearing $6?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the divergence between GDP and GDI.
Okay, break that down.
So GDP, or gross domestic product, measures aggregate expenditures, basically what we are spending as a country.
Right.
But GDI, gross domestic income, that measures what we are actually earning through wages and corporate profits. In national accounting, those two numbers should mathematically mirror each other.
What goes out must come in.
Exactly. But the report tracks a massive structural divergence beginning in late 2025. GDP was reported at 4.3%, while GDI was sluggish at 2.4%.
That is a gaping 1.9% chasm.
It is. And what it reveals is that the headline, GDP growth, is just a statistical mirage. Think about the mechanism here. If inflation is terrifying everyone, people start maxing out their credit cards to hoard inventory and essential goods before prices double.
So consumer spending explodes, making the GDP look fantastic,
Right.
but nobody's actual income went up.
Right.
It's essentially the country maxing out its credit cards and calling it a pay raise.
Exactly. And the government itself is doing the exact same thing on a sovereign scale, which leads to the most dangerous metric in the entire report, the hierarchical structure and domination score, which sits at a 9.8 out of 10.
9.8, wow.
Yeah. The U.S. has officially entered what they call fiscal inversion.
So going back to that statistic I opened the show with, unpack fiscal inversion for us.
Okay, so in fiscal year 2025, the interest required just to service the national debt reached $1.22 trillion.
Just the interest.
Just the interest. Meanwhile, the aggregate national defense budget was only $892.6 billion.
That's wild.
It is. When a global hegemon spends significantly more money servicing old debt than it does projecting power, it crosses a terminal threshold. The state essentially becomes mathematically trapped by its own ledger.
But wait, I want to push back on this macroeconomic theory for a second.
Sure.
If we have this raging supply-driven stagflation from the Strait of Hormuz blockade, why doesn't the Federal Reserve just step in and aggressively hike interest rates like they did in the 1980s or even, 2022 to crush the inflation?
Well, because if the Fed hikes interest rates to fight energy inflation today, that $1.22 trillion in debt servicing costs gets pushed into hyper-exponential territory.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, because the government is constantly issuing new debt to pay off the old debt, right? So higher interest rates mean their borrowing costs skyrocket instantly. It would trigger an immediate sovereign insolvency crisis.
So basically, if the Fed hikes rates to cool the economy, the government's mortgage payment goes up so fast that the United States instantly goes bankrupt.
Precisely.
They cannot fight inflation without destroying the federal budget.
Right. And the smart money understands this mathematical trap perfectly, which is driving this unprecedented capital flight. The report notes gold breaching $4,500 an ounce.
Insane.
But the more systemic shift is the permanent migration into digital assets. The tokenized real-world asset market actually expanded by 589%.
Okay, let's define that for a second. Tokenized real-world assets are when you take physical things like real estate, art, or U.S. Treasury bills, and you represent their ownership as digital tokens on a blockchain.
Right.
It basically allows capital to move at the speed of the internet without relying on traditional banks.
Exactly. And the educated professional class is utilizing this technology aggressively. The report details them hiding $400 billion in stablecoins.
Wow. And stablecoins are cryptocurrencies pegged to steady assets like the U.S. dollar or gold, right?
Yes, they act as an inflation ballast. So by moving wealth into stablecoins, professionals can freeze their purchasing power completely outside the collapsing domestic banking constraints.
And the report says the postgraduate elites take it a step further, using these sophisticated offshore crypto exchanges, offering 24-hour equity futures to completely shield themselves from the physical economy.
Yep.
But if the economy is mathematically collapsing and everyone with capital is hiding their money offshore, how on earth are the government statistical agencies still publishing positive economic numbers? Like, how do we get that pristine 2.1% GDP print?
Well, that brings us to the Elite Anosognosia Index, and it's scoring an alarming 9.2 out of 10.
Anosognosia. That is a fascinating, terrifying medical term.
It really is. It refers to a neurological deficit where a patient is entirely unaware of their own illness.
Right.
They literally lack the capacity to perceive that they are sick.
So we have a government that doesn't just lie about being sick, it actually believes it is perfectly healthy.
Kind of, yeah. The report suggests the executive branch intentionally destroyed its own statistical sensory organs to maintain a veneer of stability. We have to look at the Schedule F purges under Executive Order 14410. Roughly 162,000 career civil servants were stripped of their protections and just dismissed.
It's as if the government taped over the check engine light on the dashboard, ripped out all the wiring connected to the engine, and then declared the car completely fixed because the light wasn't flashing anymore.
That is exactly what happened. This massive purge gutted the institutional memory of the state. It crippled the primary statistical agencies like the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Bureau of Economic Analysis.
Right.
And if you combine that brain drain with the 43-day federal government shutdown in late 2025, the agencies were completely bereft of personnel and funding.
They couldn't do their jobs.
Right. They had to abandon physical field data collection entirely.
The report actually has a staggering detail regarding this. Because the Bureau of Labor Statistics had no field agents operating during the shutdown, they literally recorded a 0.0% change in rental costs for the entire month of October.
Yep.
They just put a zero growth placeholder in their spreadsheets. And that single data manipulation mechanically dragged the aggregate consumer price index down to 2.74%.
Which is wild. They were basically forced to rely on broken algorithms. For instance, they heavily utilized the birth-death model.
Okay, what is that?
It's an algorithmic tool that guesses how many new businesses opened and closed in a given month. In a booming economy, it smooths out the data. But in a sudden economic shock, the algorithm assumes those historical trends are continuing.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it literally hallucinates job growth that isn't happening in the real world.
So the dashboard is broken, but they're printing pristine reports. However, the administrative class that remains inside the government isn't just taking this lying down, right?
No, not at all. They are actively fighting back from inside the machine. This internal rebellion is captured in the Constitutional Unraveling Index, sitting at an 8.6 out of 10.
8.6, okay.
The educated administrative class actually filed a record 1,297 quit-tam lawsuits.
Right, and these are whistleblower lawsuits where private citizens sue on behalf of the government to expose fraud.
Exactly. And they yielded $6.8 billion in recoveries.
Wow. We are also seeing severe local pushback against federal supremacy too, right? The report details a heavily militarized raid by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, IC, at a facility in St. Louis Park, Minnesota.
Right.
And the community response was immediate. Advocacy groups like Copal mobilized protests, and the city of St. Louis Park literally joined the Minnesota Attorney General to try and legally nullify the federal ICE mandates.
Yeah.
Their argument was that the federal government was unconstitutionally denying residents access to basic public services.
Exactly. So the government's dashboard is completely broken. But out in the physical world, people cannot pay for groceries with a manipulated CPI spreadsheet.
Right.
And when those two realities collide, the societal fabric tears.
Which, leads us to the demographic stratification section.
Yeah.
Because the narrative dissonance index is at 8.8. The breakdown in the state's monopoly on information is nearly complete here.
It is.
So what does this all mean? What the data clearly shows is that a citizen's physical experience of this collapse is almost entirely dictated by their education level.
Right. Let's walk through the cohorts, starting with those holding a high school diploma or some college.
Okay.
This demographic basically lacks the capital to engage in offshore crypto flight. They absorb the absolute full brunt of the inflation tax at the gas pump and the grocery store.
They feel it the most.
Exactly. Consequently, they are taking massive physical action. They are the engine of the decentralized no kings mobilization.
And the scale of this mobilization is hard to fathom. On March 28, 2026, the report estimates 8 to 9 million people participated across 3,300 rallies nationwide.
Yeah, massive numbers.
It could completely clog the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And this was orchestrated entirely peer-to-peer, completely bypassing legacy media networks.
Right, and that same physical mobilization is driving historic labor disruptions.
Yeah.
We saw a 100,000-person regional strike in Minnesota.
Right.
You have nursing home staff mobilized by the Service Employees International Union, the SEIU, going on strike to demand fair pay against hyperinflation.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, they are pointing out the basic mathematical reality that a 2% annual wage increase is a death sentence when diesel is nearly $6. This cohort is physically bottling up domestic logistics.
So you have the working class physically halting the economy in the streets. What about the bachelor's degree cohort?
Well, these are the mid-level administrators and professionals. They understand the mathematics of the decline. They know the GDP numbers are fake, but they don't have the elite status to fully escape it.
Right.
So they wage legal and financial warfare. They're the ones architecting the municipal nullification laws, driving the whistleblower lawsuits, and intentionally contributing to $6.3 billion in massive municipal tax delinquency.
And, as we mentioned earlier, hiding their remaining wealth in stablecoins.
Exactly.
Finally, you have the postgraduate degree cohort.
Right, the apex elites. This group is architecting the fake statistical models to placate the bond markets. They are utilizing AI multipliers and offshore crypto to completely decouple their income from the foundational economy that is literally crumbling beneath them.
But they have a massive geopolitical blind spot here. While the post-grad elites think they can hide behind algorithmic manipulation and digital wealth, the ultimate trap is closing in on the physical security that underwrites their entire system.
Yes.
Which brings us to the high collapse risk score, sitting at 9.4.
The vulnerability to foreign supply choke points.
Right. It's like owning the most advanced, expensive military in the world. But your biggest rival owns the only factory on Earth that makes the spark plugs.
That is a perfect analogy. We are looking at the impending November 2026 expiration of China's rare earth element export control waivers managed by China's Ministry of Commerce, or MOOFCOM.
Okay.
The U.S. military-industrial complex is fundamentally dependent on Chinese chemical engineering to extract and process lanthanides.
Lanthanides.
Yeah. These are the 15 specific metallic elements absolutely crucial for advanced magnets, guidance systems, and stealth technology in modern asymmetric warfare.
Right now, there is a temporary waiver allowing these metals to flow, but it legally expires in November.
And when it expires, the regulatory blockade activates. And what is absolutely devastating here is the mechanism of China's 0.1% de minimis rule.
Okay, what is that?
Under this regulation, if a foreign-produced magnet has even 0.1% of its value stemming from Chinese-origin-controlled metals, it legally requires a Chinese export license.
Wait. I'm stuck on this 0.1% rule.
Oh.
Are you telling me that if Lockheed Martin builds a massive $100 million fighter jet and they buy a tiny magnet from a supplier in Europe that happens to use a fraction of a percent of Chinese rare earth metals, China can legally block the supply chain for the entire jet?
Yes. The entire defense platform is compromised. Furthermore, China utilizes the 50% affiliates rule.
Meaning?
If a sanctioned entity holds equity in an organization, it is presumptively denied licenses. So because U.S. defense contractors like Lockheed Martin have already been sanctioned by China, their global subsidiaries are legally blocked from buying these vital resources.
And the physical requirements for these platforms are immense. The telemetry report notes that a single F-35 Lightning II fighter jet requires 417 kilograms of these rare earth elements.
Right.
A Virginia-class submarine requires 4,173 kilograms.
Yeah, and the domestic supply chain simply cannot save them in time.
Right.
I mean, MP Materials is attempting a massive diversification project with their 10X facility, but it will not be operational until 2028. The U.S. defense industrial base faces an insurmountable physical blockade right exactly when it desperately needs global force projection to break the Middle Eastern oil blockade.
So just to recap the terminal feedback loop we're looking at here.
Yeah, let's tie it together.
The executive branch launches an asymmetric war in the Middle East. That triggers an immediate kinetic retaliation, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which creates a massive oil and inflation shock.
Right.
To hide the inflation and the fact that the government is trapped by a $1.22 trillion interest payment on its own debt, they purge the statistical agencies.
Exactly.
Those agencies hallucinate fake economic data to keep the bond markets happy. But the working class, feeling the very real pain of $5.37 diesel fuel, physically revolts with multi-million-person protests and massive strikes.
Yeah.
And just as the military needs to project power to fix the oil crisis, their supply chain is legally paralyzed by a Chinese rare earth blockade.
It is the systemic synthesis of state failure across every single metric.
This telemetry report, it just strips away all the political noise to show you the raw math of a complex system buckling under unprecedented stress.
It does. And it forces us to confront a reality that honestly goes beyond economics. We just discussed how the elite postgraduate class has successfully decoupled their wealth from the physical United States, right? Uploading their assets into a parallel digital reality to avoid the collapse.
Yeah, they're completely shielded from the consequences of the policies they actually oversee.
Which leaves us with a deeply unsettling question.
What's the...
Well, if the architects of the system have successfully evacuated to the cloud, will they ever possess the political will to fix the physical nation? Or will they simply watch it burn from their digital sanctuaries?
Wow. If the people steering the ship have already boarded the lifeboats, you really have to wonder who's left to patch the hull.
Exactly. It forces us to redefine what a nation even is in the 21st century.
That is a lot to think about. We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking closely at the data around you, look past the headlines, and as always, keep questioning everything you see. Until next time.